you to go back and review as we progress during this workshop season. We certainly ask that you do so. I want to share before we bring Jonathan Cross on our devotion for this morning. And I'm using a book that was written by one of our disciples, Dr. Carla T. Norton, and it's called FaceTime with God. So I thought that I would share this particular devotion because it really correlates with our topic today, protecting our places of worship. So this devotion is entitled "Open Our Eyes." It comes out of 2 Kings. It says, and when the servant got up and went out early the next day, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh, my Lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elijah prayed, "Oh Lord, open his eyes so he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So Reverend Norton says this: have you ever awakened and before you began your day, trouble after trouble seems to block or hinder your progress? In other words, you turn the news on, your peace and your purpose for the day. Often we see the myriad of challenges. We're in a pandemic, and even now we count our stresses before we see the blessing. Someone said that our troubles are opportunities or present opportunities for miracles and blessings. You are up for this challenge. Stand firm. Elijah prayed that the Lord would open his servants' eyes and see the vast army of the Lord surrounding them, armed and ready to do battle on their behalf. Let us go to God in prayer. Dear God, open our eyes that we may see you. Just in case we cannot see the answer, teach us to close our eyes and walk by faith. The power of God is mighty to save. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. If God is for us, who can be against us? If God is for us, it is more than the world, more than the pandemic, more than visible or invisible trouble or problems that are against us. Jesus Christ, who transcends time and space, is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. God, as we go forth in this workshop today, we ask for blessings upon our speaker, Mr. Jonathan Cross, as he gives us tools and pearls of wisdom that we can use to protect our places, our worship spaces. We give you glory, Lord, and we honor and praise you on today, for this is the day that you have made, and we shall rejoice and be glad in it. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, amen. I am so excited this day to introduce to you Mr. Jonathan William Cross, and I want to share his bio with us. So Jonathan is married to his wife of 25 years, Sherry Hampton Cross, and a graduate of the University of Memphis with a BPS in Business Administration and Entertainment Industry Management. Jonathan Cross is known within the Memphis political, business, and worship communities to be a tenacious business professional and an entertainment powerhouse as a music producer, live production engineer, and facilities and executive protection specialist. Cross is a man of first, and over the course of 25 years, he has owned 3 commercial recording studios, employed as many as 25 employees, managed a lucrative publishing catalog of over 300 songs and compositions. He remains the owner of several ongoing business enterprises, including Central Church Solutions, Better Concert Sound, Effective Threat Protection, and Dauntless Lifestyle Ventures. During the 12 years prior to 2020, before COVID, y'all, Mr. Cross served as the Chief Audio Engineer and Senior Technical System Director, Director of Media, and finally Church Safety and Campus Protection Consultant at the renowned Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church in Memphis, Tennessee. In 2020, in the midst of the world's COVID-19 outbreak, Cross transitioned solely to independent consultative practice in order to place all of his focus on the various business and consultation interests and to initiate the national launch and expansion of his training centers of America and the Dauntless Lifestyle Ventures Incorporated. Through his experience producing and engineering events and concerts in large venues, churches, and other entertainment facilities, observing security successes and failures within them and recognizing emerging threats in 2017, Mr. Cross made the decision to prepare himself to transition professionally into active threat mitigation and to become an ATM, active shooter prevention specialist. I'm going to share some of the credentials that Mr. Cross has. He became the first of only 2 non-law enforcement and non-military civilians in the nation to receive a Tier 1 certified tactical firearms instructor certification with a DoD training credential conveyed by instructors from the Army's Marksmanship Unit and the 1st Special Forces Operation Detachment Delta, otherwise known as Delta Force or the unit. He accomplished this feat training alongside enlisted technical instructors for the Marine Special Operations Command, United States Joint Special Operations, and Naval Special Warfare. Jonathan is tough. He has a whole lot. As I was reading his bio, I was thinking, you know, I want the Lord to walk with me on my journey everywhere I go. And Lord, I also want Jonathan Cross. When I find myself in places of danger, I need my brother to also dispatch him to be with me. Using his unique and extensive technical training and certification, Jonathan discreetly conducts intensive safety and active shooter training and seminars for religious organizations, churches, mosques, educational institutions, corporations, healthcare facilities throughout the country to audiences ranging from small groups to dozens and hundreds of people. He also provided advanced active threat mitigation and tactical training for civilians, corporate executives, state, local, federal law enforcement agencies, including United States Marshals and specialized military personnel and elite reaction units from around the world, throughout the region and country, and from coast to coast. I am excited, really excited. Reverend Dr. Crystal Williams, we're all excited today to have with us the Mr. Jonathan William Cross II, who will share with us, again, the pearls of wisdom, the things that we need to protect our places of worship. Jonathan, welcome.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Elder Hunt. I appreciate that, and I am honored to be here with you all today. I do not take this lightly. I do not take the opportunity to speak to God's people lightly. It is not something that of my own merit that I'm entitled to or that I deserve. So I'm humbled whenever someone calls me to come speak with them or to help with them or to share. So I'm thrilled to be with you all here this morning. And I think we're going to have a good time. You know, we're going to take a different approach on this very heavy subject. It's a subject that is rife with with challenges, both intellectually, socially, politically, theologically, and sometimes people are very uncomfortable talking about what we're going to talk about today. But the scripture says, unless God keep the house, the watchman watch in vain. And we are going to talk about how God can be with the watchman and what the responsibilities of a watchman are when it comes to keeping the house. So I'm thrilled to be here with you all, and I pray that the Lord will use me to share some things that will help us to protect our houses of worship Ecclesiastes tells us that for everything, there's a time and a season, everything under heaven, a time and a season. And so we are to be like the ant and know the seasons. And right now, there are some things going on in our world that give us reason to really pay attention to the seasons. We are in a season where we've seen a great amount of death, both from sickness and also from violence. And so the scripture tells us that those things will occur. So we are not to ignore them. And so the people who go before us, their responsibility is to make sure that the house of the Lord is prepared. And it's my responsibility. God has placed it on me to help the people who go before the people, so that we can all be as wise as serpents, harmless as doves, but not tempt the Lord. Because if we tempt the Lord, the Lord may make us be consumed with serpents. So we're not going to tempt the Lord. Faith without works is dead. So I think we're going to have a good time today. All right. Are we ready? Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. And let me grab it, make sure I get the right one. All right. Can everybody see that? All right, give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. So today, what we're going to talk about, I clicked the wrong clicker, just a moment. All right, so today we're going to talk about church and house of worship protection. Specifically, we're going to talk about mass casualty attack prevention and active threat mitigation. Specifically, when we typically think about churches, we are historically we've thought about protecting the offerings, protecting the pastors, or what have you. But obviously, in the last several years, there's been a lot of things going on in society where people have been attacking churches, and the threats go beyond the threats to the nursery, people stealing children out, people running off with the money. The threat, the most aggressive threat, is the active shooter threat. And so today we're going to talk a lot about that, and we're going to do some things that's going to kind of change our mindset about it. All right, so we're going to present a training and planning outline for churches and religious institutions for when run, hide, fight is simply not good enough. And generally, it never is good enough. So our session outline today is we're going to deal with the threat realities. We're going to discuss the uncomfortable facts and the most famous last words of people who face tragic circumstances. I'm going to introduce you to something that I call the carnage to time ratio. We're going to talk about the fundamental concepts of contemporary protection of churches. And we're going to introduce 4 key elements of what I call effective threat mitigation. We're going to introduce a basic planning philosophy, which is security in depth. We're going to discuss that. And we're going to discuss actual active threat mitigation of threats and the use of force continuum when it comes to defending churches. We will also talk a little bit about some consulting and training options and the training methodology that I propose that churches adapt in order to really protect themselves. So, in addressing the threat reality, this is not going to be like any other active shooter type of training that you've ever dealt with. I've set in on dozens of active shooter trainings, a bunch of different versions of Alive and Run, Hide, Fight, and Alice training. And the presenters spent a whole lot of time talking about statistics and what has happened before. For the sake of this conversation, statistics and probability are going to be irrelevant. Now, I know for those who are scholars amongst us, saying that statistics and probability are irrelevant may kind of grate your nerves a little bit, but I have a reason for doing it, and it should be made clear. Here's the reality. Hold on, it's not going. There we go. Terrorist attacks like terrorist attacks, an attacker, especially an active shooter, only has to show up and get it right one time. So whether we're dealing with the probability of something happens is irrelevant. If they show up one time to do something, it's going to be really bad for us. So that means we must be prepared for that one actual time that someone with deadly intent shows up to murder innocent people. And if you are the pastor or the administrator or the chief executive officer or the senior servant of a church, you carry the weight to actually protect people. So there we can talk about the statistics of what has happened or the probabilities, but the reality, it's like a terrorist attack. If a terrorist succeeds one time, they've succeeded. And so we have to be prepared to stop them every time that they come. So here's some uncomfortable facts. Since 2002, the government has been very successful at protecting us from attacks from foreign terrorists. So here on American soil, since 9/11, we haven't had any foreign attackers be successful at creating mass carnage here. And we're really grateful about that. But here's the reality. History has shown that over and over, that same government who is so successful at protecting us from foreign threats does not have the adequate resources to stop homegrown killers, the homegrown terrorists, mass shooters who periodically shoot up schools, entertainment venues, public spaces, workplaces, and our houses of worship. We have too many incidents, historical incidents in the recent future that bear this out as a fact. We cannot stick our head in the sand and ignore that. That is a fact. We obviously, we like to be able to rely on the government, but the government can't always protect us. And so we're going to discuss why they can't, or we'll just hit that briefly. Number one, the government is restricted or prohibited by privacy laws. Here in the States, the governments and police agencies, their hands are significantly tied in terms of what they can and cannot do, what they can and cannot see. So they are unable to provide meaningful surveillance on lone wolves and other random, let me go back here. Let's take it back. We're doing this Zoom, it's skipping back a little bit, so I'm gonna go back. Okay, they're unable to provide meaningful surveillance on lone wolves and random private individuals in the manner that it does internationally. Our Fourth Amendment privacy laws protect us, but they also protect people who may have bad intentions. Also, the government is unable to establish or maintain relevant predictive databases that may identify potential threat actors, especially people who are in acute emotional or mental crisis. And also, the government is unable to anticipate motivating factors or triggering events for individuals. At any given time, I'd like to tell people that any random person could be 5 to 10 seconds away from losing their mind and becoming extremely violent. So we don't know what may be the triggering events for some people. And obviously the government cannot know that. That's why we constantly hear them saying, if you see something, say something, all right? The government is also unable to provide police officers everywhere the public gathers, is unable to provide adequate training of the best tactical practices at every level of law enforcement, especially at the local level. If I were to put a pin in that, the most unfortunate example of that, we saw that very recently in Texas. Large police presence, and evidently that police department, the members of that department did not have the fundamental skills that would have allowed them to engage that shooter in that school and take that room and try to get help to those children in Texas much sooner. And I think there probably would have been less lives lost. So that's a prime example of that. At every level, the government is just not able to provide significant best practices and training and obviously can't afford it all the time for law enforcement at every level. Also, the government has no control over private property or the decisions that private property owners and managers choose to, in terms of relation, or how they choose to protect or how they choose not to protect or secure their property. The government has no control over that. And so some places may have a weak standard of protection on their facilities. Some other places may have a stronger hedge around them. The government has no part in that, especially when it comes to religious institutions, because the government is prohibited by the First Amendment from requiring religious institutions to do anything, because Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So what's most shocking about thinking about the government and protecting us is this simple fact. The federal courts, including the US Supreme Court, has ruled numerous times that the police have no duty to protect. That's a shocker to many people, because we grew up, we looked at cars and we would see police cars and it'd say protect and serve on it. And we would think that the police have no duty to protect, but the courts have ruled that that is not true. A couple of court examples. In 1981, in the case of Warren versus District of Columbia, the DC Court of Appeals held that police have a general public duty, but no specific legal duty exists unless there is a special relationship between an officer and an individual, such as an officer having a person in custody. The US Supreme Court has also ruled that police have no specific obligation to protect. In a 1989 decision in Deshaney versus Winnebago County Department of Social Services, the justices ruled that social services departments had no duty to protect a young boy from his abusive father. In 2005, in Castle Rock versus Gonzalez, a woman sued the police for failing to protect her from her husband after he violated a restraining order and abducted and killed their 3 children. The justices again affirmed that the police had no such duty. And then most recently, the US Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit upheld a lower court ruling that police could not be held liable for failing to protect students in the 2018 shooting that claimed 17 students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Just like we saw in Uvalde, the Parkland, Florida situation revealed that even though a police officer was on the scene immediately, he failed to go into the school and he could not be held liable for that because under law, he has no duty to protect. That's shocking, but that should put us in a mindset that we have to think differently about our protection. In fact, we have to rethink the concept of outsourcing our protection and taking hold of it, taking it captive, like a thought, and it says taking it captive to ourselves. So I'm going to introduce to you a new concept. And this concept is what I call the carnage to time ratio. Specifically, it is the amount of death that your church has deemed to be acceptable before police arrive. So as we talk, as we discuss this today, I want you to keep that concept in the back of your mind, that the amount of death that's acceptable to us before help comes on the scene. Right, so there's some famous last words. We hear it every time there is a significant violent event anywhere in the country, in public, we hear it. We hear it when someone commits a violent act in a neighborhood, in a pristine part of town. We hear it. And those famous last words are this: it will never happen here. If you were to think about it and admit it to yourself, you've heard someone say those words, or you may have even had the thought or a similar thought to yourself. But those famous last words that is the very thinking that gives the person who's acting under the devil's influence the opportunity to truly go about prowling like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So we're going to shift our mindset then to a survival mindset by reshaping our thinking when it comes to protecting ourselves and specifically protecting our houses of worship and the people in it. There are many components to church security, but when we really think about it, when it comes to the active shooter, that is the most significant threat that we can face. People can steal the church's money. We have insurance to cover for that. Something can happen to the building. We have the insurance to cover that. But if something happens to people's lives, as I shared with a church last week that I spoke to, when a person asked me about turning the other cheek and vengeance being the Lord, I told them the reason we can turn the other cheek is because we have two cheeks to turn. But we only have one life. So we only have one life to give. We don't have another one to give. And so we need to keep that in mind as we think about that. So if you're the administrator of a church, you're the pastor of the church, chief executive officer of the church, the weight to protect the people that comes into the facility is yours. You carry the weight. No one else carries the weight. You carry the weight. So we're going to shift our mindset to one of survival by reshaping our thinking. So true security is created when a protection mindset is coupled and married with a tactical skill set and a practical protection footprint. If I were writing a paper, that would be the thesis of my paper. That would be the first line of my opening sentence, letting you know that in my opinion, when it comes to protecting the churches, true security is created when a protection mindset is married with actual skills and a practically implemented protection footprint. I would proffer that traditional church security thinking is outdated. In the past, the primary focus, as I've said before, has been on protecting and securing the senior pastor and the first family from threats associated with controversial sermons, pastoral counseling services, political statements that the pastor may make, and public statements on controversial social positions. Traditionally, the primary role of protecting the pastor have been armor bearers. Armor bearers, in my mind, I see them like I see the Secret Service. Close protection for the pastor, close protection for the president, and for any VIPs that may be with them, we can whisk them away. All right, well, we've also thought in terms of protecting the finances, protecting the offerings, protecting deposits. And we've outsourced that typically where the primary role of protecting that has been hired security and armored truck companies, right? So many churches, small, large or small, when it comes to collecting their money, Wells Fargo is going to show up one day or shortly after we've taken the offering or what have you, and they're going to secure that. Obviously, we have long had the challenge of problems with vehicles in the parking lot. All right. And so we've thought about protecting vehicles in the parking lot, and we either put hired security on patrol in the vehicles, or we may have some hired security who's kind of walking the parking lot, or we'll have a deacon who's out there keeping an eye on things somewhat. And obviously, this is crucial. We focus on protecting children from child predators, right? And we typically address this by instituting background checks and parental involvement, right? You know, so we have parents working in the children's nursery and the children's ministry, and everybody has to go through a background check. And those things are very important to make sure that no one is doing anything inappropriate with any children. With all of those things covered, little thought historically has been given to actually protecting the congregation from lethal threat actors. We've always known and felt that the pastor may be under threat, The finances may be under threat, the property may be under threat, and obviously perverts may be interested in the children, and so the children may be under threat. But historically, we have not really paid attention to protecting the congregate. And the congregate, the visitor, the person in the pew, are extremely vulnerable for a variety of reasons, and we're going to talk about that. So when we've been thinking about traditional security in churches, there's been a part of the mindset has been dealing with the frequency of events and balancing that with the severity of a particular threat. All right, so when we're thinking about how to best protect the house of worship and the congregation, we are tempted to think about three things. What is most likely to occur? All right, that's, we're kind of actuarial in nature. We think like insurance companies in that way. The insurance company is setting rates based on probabilities, right? So they're thinking about what is most likely to occur. We also look at what is least likely to occur. And then we also consider how expensive is it to protect and mitigate against unlikely threats. All right, so we're balancing that in our mind. For most concerns, the severity of the outcomes is tolerable because they do not include the loss of life, right? So we may, if we have property insurance for the church, we may have very high deductibles for certain things and say, hey, we'll absorb certain losses because, the loss of a piece of equipment, a keyboard or a drum machine or something like that is not so high. And so we'll have a $15,000 or $20,000 deductible because we'll spend $1,000 to replace the keyboard. But when we think about the life, the cost to replace a life, we cannot replace replace a life, and we cannot replace the companionship, right? So the cost is very high. And so when we're thinking about protecting lives in our houses of worship, cost is something that should be the least of our concern. And so I would consider that this is wrong thinking. The formally most unlikely threat is the one with the absolute worst outcome, the active shooter. Now, Memphis historically, I remember when Memphis had 2,000 churches, and then at some point it had 3,000 churches. I wouldn't doubt if Memphis has 5,000 or 6,000 churches in it. The likelihood of any one particular church facing an active shooter is probably relatively low. But if the active shooter shows up, it's going to be really, really bad for everybody involved, everybody on the campus. It's like a terrorist attack getting it right one time. Now, this is especially problematic for smaller ministries due to them having possibly fewer financial and human resources. And smaller ministries may have a less significant visible deterrence factor than large ministries. All right, somebody who's looking to go and strike against a church may have it in their mind, even if they haven't sought out or examined the church, they may have it in their mind, hey, that's a large ministry, they probably have protection. But we've seen through the course of the years, both large and small ministries are hit by the active shooters. And more of them occurred to small ministries. But there have been a few devastating ones in some larger ministries, especially out in Colorado. All right, so we're thinking about this and securing churches. And so I want to deal with a couple of frequently asked questions that come up when we're talking about protecting churches. People often ask, what about security guards and using police to protect the church? And so we're going to talk about this realistically. Traditional security guards are not well paid, and therefore they are not well trained, especially in the use of firearms or active tactical response. The typical security guard will have to pay for his own training, but if he's not well paid, he can't afford training. And I can tell you firsthand that the security guard companies that hire them, really do not invest in continuing education for them. In fact, here in Memphis, the armed security guard turnover is extremely high. You're literally looking at turnover every 60 to 90 days at security guard companies for many people. So that means that there's an inconsistent workforce. And so if we're looking to protect our church with security guards, we may be getting substandard protection. In other words, we will get the illusion of protection, but not really a skilled person. Here's the other thing about them. As hirelings, they typically have no skin in the game. The scripture talks about us engaging with the church and being a hireling, right? And there's a hireling mentality. And if you hire somebody, you really want them to be truly bought in. Security guards, that may be a challenge oftentimes with security guards. And here's why. By law, observe and report is the sole responsibility of a security guard, not protect and defend. They are armed primarily for personal defense. They are not armed to go save somebody else. Their weapon literally is for their own personal defense. We would hope that they would step up to the plate if the need arises, but hope and a guarantee are two different things. You know, I hoped that I was going to win that Powerball or that Mega Millions about 2 weeks ago. I had it all planned out, had the island I was going to buy and everything, but that didn't happen. So I have to keep working to maintain my finances, because hope and a prayer sometimes gets us nowhere. Now, let's talk about police. The average police officer is not a gunfighter and has no tactical experience. Now, my discussion here is not to impugn or diminish police officers, but we're having a difficult conversation and we're going to deal with the realities. Contrary to popular belief, the typical police officer does not have a lot of experience with the firearm. Police officers know the law. They know the procedures for bringing people into custody, but they are not gunfighters, all right? And so if we're looking at bringing them in as protection, we need to understand what it is that we're bringing in. So when we think about that, we have to face the reality that the typical officer does not have the firearms training of a SWAT officer. That's why SWAT exists, Special Weapons and Tactics. They exist because they are a small group and they get extra special training. Here's the thing about the SWAT officer. The SWAT team comes after somebody, the other officers are already on the scene, and they come later. They're generally not going to be on the scene, and the typical officer does not have their skill set. Also, most officers do not train often with their weapons. Most of them don't even shoot throughout the year, except for in the week or two leading up to requalification. And sometimes as rarely as every 18 to 24 months, depending on what the qualification standards or the requalification standards are for their particular department. So we as the public, we presume that the police are extremely well trained. But as we saw in Uvalde, that's not the case. As we saw in Parkland, that's not the case. Now, police officers are heroes every day. They do some heroic things, but we really do have to make sure that we understand and that we properly understand what we can expect from them. Here's the other thing. While police have arrest authority, beyond their potential deterrence factor, the strategic positioning required to provide proper campus and facilities coverage do not make them a true security solution for the active shooter. One of the primary reasons for that is that to hire a police officer to be on your campus is expensive. It's much more expensive to hire them than it is a regular security officer. But when we're talking about protecting a footprint of some churches, many acres, many doors, many angles, many ways to come in, many directions to cover. It's going to be expensive and difficult to have enough people on scene to do it. Now, in reality, we do have enough people on scene to do it, but they are non-traditional people, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit. All right. But we're thinking about security guards and police, and I wanted to show you that while they seem to be the obvious solution, they're not necessarily always going to be the most effective solution. All right, so there's some unique problems of churches that churches face when it comes to dealing with active shooters or security in general. Here's the first one. Churches are open to the public. Unknown people routinely enter and congregate and aggregate in it. It's a place where we aggregate people, and it's open to the public, and we don't know who's coming and going. Everyone knows what time the church meets, including and especially people who are disgruntled with their spouses, people who are estranged parents. They're estranged from their children. So my ex-wife's not letting me see my baby. I know they're going to be at church at a certain time. I know whether I'm going to get my baby. If I can't have her, nobody can, and I know she's going to be at church at 10 o'clock, right? So everybody knows what time the church meets, including these disgruntled spouses, estranged parents. People who are socially and politically offended know when the doors of the church are open. People who are financially and emotionally distressed know when the church meets. And some of these people may reach out to the church and may get some assistance or may be denied assistance. Some of these people, that may cause them to snap. So we don't know the triggers, but we know that there are people who are financially and emotionally distressed, and they routinely interact or engage with the church. And then obviously, mentally and spiritually deranged people who are prone to violent attack also know when the church meets. And not only that, they can surveil the church. They can come in and probe the church. They can come and do as the man did in Charleston at Mother Emanuel, come in and sit amongst us and learn some things about the church. That was not the first time he was at that church before he shot those people. He had an idea of what was happening to this church. And so this is a unique problem of the church, because we have a designated time that people know we're open. So when we think about these unique problems of the church and we think about typical active shooter responses, obviously, I bet you almost all of us, if not 100% of us, in our work environments or educational environment are familiar with traditional active shooter training. Well, in the church, the traditional active shooter training presents a unique problem. Run, hide, fight. The run, hide, fight active shooter system does not work in the church sanctuary. And here's why. There's no place to run. There are bottlenecks. Pews and aisles create too few paths of egress and movement, while giving attackers clear lines of sight and offensive movement. All right, so we're locked into the pews or into our row of chairs. We only have 2 or 3 aisles that we can get to, but we have to run over other people to access the aisle. And when the active shooter comes in, the active shooter takes control of the aisle and can shoot indiscriminately. So run, hide, fight is not really practical in the church unless if you happen to be standing right beside the door, or right beside a way out of the sanctuary, or right beside a hall where you can zip into another room. Run, hide, fight is very problematic for sanctuaries. There are few to no places to hide in a church, especially a sanctuary, for the same reasons, the bottlenecks. We don't have barriers and things. The church is designed for us to have clear lines of sight. Why? Because we all are paying attention to the platforms, to the pulpit, to the stages, right? So we have clear lines of sight. Other than the pews, other than getting into the pews, there is no place to hide. And if we get into the pew, then obviously we're not running because we have no mobility. right? So there's also no place to fight. Why? Because of the bottleneck, because of the pews. We are in the pew. We cannot move. We cannot access a person who has come in, right? And so there's no place to fight. And there are no improvised weapons available unless we're going to throw the hymnal or our Bible at someone. And obviously that's better than nothing, but that does not give us much of a chance if we're an individual who's sitting in the pew. Church is also a crowded space, right? So literally, and I don't say this to be comical, but churches are literally sitting duck zones. What do? We do two things, or we do really three things in church. We sit down, we stand, we sit down, we stand, and we walk to give offerings or go to the altar. Other than that, we are sitting, we are stationary in church. That is a sitting duck zone. We're like just crabs in a barrel. If someone comes in, because we're stuck in the pews, the aisles are bottlenecks, we are very vulnerable because it's crowded. This is a problem that is unique specifically to churches. So with that understanding, without any designated defenders, there is no defense for congregants in the church. Now, the pastor on the platform, if something happens, it's like the Secret Service with the president. If there's a disturbance, our understanding is that the armor bearers are going to whisk the pastor and the pastoral family away, right? Because people are strategically placed to be able to do that. But there's no one there to whisk the congregant away. And so we have to have designated defenders in order to defend them. So with that in mind, then I'm going to introduce to you what I call the biblical model for protection of the house of the Lord. And so I'm going to read a few scriptures here, and we're going to start first in 1 Chronicles chapter 9, verses 21 through 24. And Zechariah, the son of Meshelemiah, that's a difficult name, Mishael, was porter of the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. All these things were chosen, all these which were chosen to be porters in the gates were 212. These were reckoned by their genealogy in their villages, whom David and Samuel the seer did ordain in their set office. So they and their children had the oversight of the gates of the house of the Lord, namely the house of the tabernacle by wards. In 4 quarters were the porters, toward the east, toward the west, toward the north, toward the south. The porters were there guarding the gates. Now let's skip forward a little further deeper in Chronicles in chapter 6, and then we're going to take some excerpts from verses 1 through 19, because we're going to discover some things about these porters. When I read this scripture, several things pop out with me. Now, so concerning the divisions of the porters, who we just saw in the other passages, were guarding the gates. Of the Korites was Meshelemiah, the son of Korah, of the sons of Asaph. Also was Shemaiah, so verse 6, his son were sons born, that ruled throughout the house of their father. Now, this is what jumped out to me. For they were mighty men of valor, mighty people of valor. The sons of Shemaiah, Othni, and Raphael, and Obed, and Elzabad, whose brethren were strong men, Eliah and Shemachiah. I think that's right. So what is stuck out again? So we got mighty men of valor. We have strong men, strong people sticking out. All these are the sons of Obed-Edom. All right, so we remember who Obed-Edom was. God blessed Obed-Edom's house, right? And they and their sons and their brethren, able men for strength for the service. There were 62 of Obed-Edom. And Meshelemiah has sons and brethren, strong men, 18. Now, remember in the first passage of Chronicles we read, we saw that there were 200 and something of them guarding the gates. Here we see 18 people, right? We see able people. We see all of these people, which means it's more than just one person standing in the foyer, one person in the lot. There was a team of people established in the biblical model. And, and of course, we like to say that everything we see in the Old Testament was a type and a shadow for what we do in the New Testament, right? So we get some guide from the Old Testament so for us to use in the church during this new dispensation, right? So that is the biblical model. The scriptures tell us if a strong man or the house with a strong man armed, the house is secure, his goods are secure, right? So the house protected by the strong person, that place is secure. We have the biblical model for that. So I want to examine the fundamental concepts of contemporary church protection as I see it. Number one, we must have commitment. We must resolve in our mind, every leader of the church, from the pastor to the elders, to the diaconate, to the governing boards, to the trustees, to the ministry leaders, department leaders, everyone must have this in my mind. We resolve that active shooters must not be allowed to maintain the opportunity to kill with impunity on our campus. That must be our number one commitment. Number two commitment, we must then have a threat mitigation mindset. In other words, if someone comes onto our property, we must mitigate it immediately. We must be committed to that, having a watchman's spirit so that we resolve that we will not allow these people to come and work carnage. The number three commitment, we must have a credible protection footprint, right? So we can't have an illusion of security. We must have true security. A place is not secure if it's not true security. It's like a secret. It's not a secret if more than one person knows about it. If I want to keep a secret, I better keep it to myself. Same thing with security. I cannot delude myself. We must not delude ourselves about security. So we can't seem like or think we got security. We must have real security. It's like in philosophy, when you talk about logic, the fundamental concept of logic is, in order for a statement to be true, it must be completely true. It can't be partially true and us consider it to be true. In order for it to be true, it must be completely true. In order for us to have a true security footprint, true security at our church, we literally must have a credible protection footprint. So for me, the credible protection footprint is what I call effective threat mitigation. Obviously, you can see what we're talking about. This is not a run, hide, fight presentation. We are talking about effective threat mitigation. And the only effective threat mitigation is active threat mitigation. Faith without works is dead. Securing our church is not merely a philosophical construct. We must be able to literally secure the church against all threats. You know, almost as if we were taking the oath, the constitutional oath. I will defend the church against all threats, foreign and domestic. I will defend the church against all threats, especially ones that come to take life. So we're going to examine 4 elements of effective threat mitigation, because again, we are shaping mindset. So here are the 4 elements. Understanding, number 1, what active threat mitigation actually is. So we have to have a cognizant recognition. When we have this recognition, then we must commit to clear statements in our policy of acknowledgement threats or acknowledging threats. In other words, we should have clear statements of threat acknowledgement. We must have the capability to protect and defend the space. And we must have a commitment to decisiveness of action. If any one of those are missing, especially if number 1 is missing, we cannot get to number 4. Because if we don't understand what decisiveness of action really means, then we will never be able to be decisive in our actions. If we will not put into writing, into our policy, a clear statement acknowledging the existence of threats, then we'll never put a plan into place that gives us the capability to protect and defend. So all of these elements work together. So we're going to talk about them a little more in detail. So number one, the active threat mitigation. We're going to define it. Active threat mitigation is the immediate forcible response, against a lethal threat actor by a person already on the scene, such that the attacker, is stopped immediately in his or her tracks. The key concept here is affirmatively forcible reaction by persons already on the scene. Therefore, this definition does not include simply waiting for police to arrive to stop the threat. Remember, earlier I told you to keep in mind the carnage to time ratio. How much time or how much carnage or death is acceptable on your church campus while we're waiting for police to arrive? Active threat mitigation does not include waiting for police. So here's a question. Do you and your church understand and embrace the concept that sometimes violence is required to neutralize violent threat actors? You don't have to answer that right now, but that is something that you need to be discussing amongst yourselves, amongst your leadership. Do we understand and embrace this concept that we may have to use violence to neutralize violence? In order to save life, we may have to harm it and possibly take it. It's a difficult thing to come to, but that is something we have to think about. Statements of acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is this, that we are accepting the fact that a murderer with powerful weaponry may manifest themselves on your campus. There must be a cognitive, mental acknowledgement of the existence of the lethal threat realities that leads your church or your organization of churches to strategically plan and practically prepare an immediate effective response. The key is immediate response. And we must commit to that. You know, if we don't commit, it's like if we don't write it down, it's not true, right? It's like a contract. We make a contract with ourselves that we recognize that powerful weaponry may manifest itself on our campus. So as a society, we have to leave the state of denial and recognize that random, acute occurrence of lethal threat events against and within easily accessible, poorly secured public institutional spaces like churches is a reality. And that it is up to you to premeditate your organization's response and survival to such an event. Because literally, run, hide, fight is not a practical plan. It does not work to timely stop the active threat actor the active threat actor from snatching life or health from the people in your care or your space or your custody. We have to recognize this as a fact so that we can do some things about it. So here's another question for you to ponder. Does your church recognize the potential for and the existence of lethal threat events? It's not a matter of how statistically probable they are. It's a matter that it is possible. And if it emerges on your campus, it could be catastrophic if we have not put in place the proper protection footprint. Now, obviously, we must have a commitment to having actual capability. So, capability is a church's security ministry must be capable of immediately stopping the lethal threat actor. Therefore, institutions must have taken steps to ensure that they have skilled and dauntless protectors and defenders physically present in the sanctuaries, on the campuses, and within and upon church properties to immediately disarm or neutralize armed attackers and mass killers. The church must be committed to training and or developing a personnel cadre with who has both combatives, that means hand-to-hand training, and offensive tactical skills, including training their staff, ministry leaders, volunteers, and volunteers as what I call non-traditional protectors or defenders within the church. The church, here's the benefit of the church. We aggregate people, and we aggregate people, so we pull people together. And the church is a hospital, so we pull people together and we put salve on them and we nourish them, and then we nourish them to health, and then we put them to work within our ministry, right? And we require them to work and serve each other, and also to be witnesses to other people to come. Securing the church is a ministry in and of itself. And since it is a ministry in and of itself, there is no reason why we should not leverage our ability to aggregate people and pick us out amongst them, people to be porters, to be gatekeepers of our church, in the same way that we pick out diaconate and deacons to serve in various administrative and support capacities in the spiritual work. We have to have some people who are bold, brave, skilled, fearless, competent, standing on the wall like Nehemiah had people working with the trowel in one hand and the sword and the buckler in the other. All right, so we must have actual capability. Up until now, the standard procedures for dealing with the active shooters have been institutions initiating their facilities lockdown or relying on surveillance technologies to protect them at the onset of an active shooter event. Cameras and surveillance are mostly great for documenting the act, but doing nothing to actually mitigate an active mass murderer beyond possibly providing an initial visual warning that something is afoot. Now, advanced warning, if we can see something, that is helpful for us. But the camera's not going to get down off the wall and tackle the person, disarm the person, neutralize them. All right. So, and just going into lockdown does not stop a person. When I do these, I have a choice of sometimes whether I would show an actual video of a church actually being attacked. I have such videos. I'm not going to show it today, but if you've ever seen it happen, it's devastating, which means, and when you understand the nature of the devastation, we must have someone there. We have to then understand it is difficult to lock down the church, and the cameras don't do anything. In order to immediately begin mitigating a deadly attack, your church must have personnel who have their own special defensive training. Because again, we talked about this before, the typical security guard, whether armed or not, is by law trained and limited to observing and reporting, not interdicting and saving lives. You should not be surprised if the security guard in the middle of an event runs off. Many people would. So we need people who have a watchman's spirit, a mitigation mindset, and a mindset to be trained to become dauntless so that they will be committed to putting that capability to work. So question, this is for you, your leadership to think about. Does your church have sufficiently trained personnel within its facilities and on its premises that can respond immediately, efficiently, and effectively to put down one or more lethal threat actors before the police arrive? And that means covering all the potential areas, right? Not leaving some area uncovered. So with this in mind, I want to introduce it to a concept. Just because you have people on your campus who have a gun permit, I can assure you as a firearms trainer that a gun permit is not training, nor is it proof of training just because a person has one. I teach the state of Tennessee's gun permit class, and I can tell you this is what the class is. The state requires very minimum things. The class is going to teach you general gun safety, the law, and specifically when and when you cannot use lethal force and where you can and cannot carry your gun. And it presumes that you know how to shoot. It's not going to teach you how to shoot, and it's certainly not going to teach you how to shoot well. So just because you have some people who are armed in your facility or on your campus or in your congregation does not mean that that is sufficient to deal with the active shooter. People may be more of a danger to themselves than others than they are a credible threat mitigator. All right, so focus then, or gather in your mind as you talk amongst your leadership, that you must build real capability for decisiveness of action. Decisiveness of action is the immediate forcible reaction to neutralize the active lethal threat actor with an equal or greater response of force. That is the imperative. Unfortunately, we must recognize that when the shooter is actively shooting, your team, and this is controversial, must begin shooting the shooter to neutralize the shooter. They must be able to do it accurately and safely, and they must do it now. And the only way to do that is through training. We have had a very recent example of this. It's not a church, but it's a large public space. And it proved this, even though it's a controversial thing, it proved that the good guy with the gun is the solution when somebody comes with a gun. Because otherwise, we're going to call people with guns. We're just going to have to wait 4 to 12 minutes for them to get there, right? Up in Indianapolis or in Indiana, maybe a month ago, when the gentleman or the guy showed up with the AR-15 to shoot up the mall, a non-law enforcement individual took 10 magnificent shots from 40 yards away. That's a long way to neutralize that threat, to diminish the carnage. So instead of 30 or 40 people dying, we have 3 or 4 people who were killed and injured. The carnage to time ratio in that case, literally was 4 to 15. In other words, 4 people dead in 15 seconds. Really 3 people dead in 15 seconds because the 4th one was the shooter himself. So the carnage to time, 3 to 15 versus us seeing in other situations up in Detroit, in Brooklyn, 17 people. In some other, in Uvalde, 31 people. In a church in Texas, 31 people waiting. So it's politically and socially difficult for us to discuss. But if somebody shows up with the gun, we have to neutralize them right then. And as Brother Malcolm said, by any means necessary. So as a society, and even as custodians of life and property, we tend to want to look to the government agencies for our protection. While we pay taxes, to the government agencies, and we believe that the tax dollars will provide us with promised services, including protection from evil people, the truth is that when seconds count, the expected law enforcement response is literally minutes away. Unless a police officer is already on site, near or at your location, the police is literally on average 4 to 12 minutes away after the 911 call is made, which may not even be immediate. When bullets are already flying, that is an eternity. History has shown that if the active shooter is left unchallenged and unchecked, and he's not fired upon, dozens or even hundreds of people can be ruthlessly cut down, murdered, and catastrophically injured during that time. So we must have a commitment to a decisiveness of action. Unless the police are already on your site, near your location, that got in there twice. But I'll say it again. They are 4 to 12 minutes away from the 911 call. The value of those precious minutes means that by the time that police and law enforcement responds and arrive, all of the carnage has occurred, and a great many people are dead or very much injured already. So in order to ensure that lives are saved, churches protected, carnage prevented and greatly lessened, you must recognize and embrace those 4 elements of effective threat mitigation. Otherwise, we will not have a credible protection footprint. So here's the final question. Are the lives in your pews and in your church's care worthy of an immediate, decisive response to neutralize the threat, the lethal threat actor? Or are you comfortable waiting minutes when seconds count? So again, examine your carnage to time ratio. Is the acceptable carnage to time ratio where you work, where you study, where we shop, and where we worship? What is it? Is it acceptable? If you're at a place of work, ask your employer, ask the principal at your schools, ask the clerk where you work, and ask your pastor or the leaders at your church. Remember, when the threat is active, you cannot wait. You must mitigate. You will only fight for your life if you've been given skills to actually fight for your life. And that goes for the people you appoint to fight for you. They must have skills. Otherwise, everything else will be paralysis, death, people will be frozen in sight, or mass hysteria, none of which solve the issue. Most likely, it will be all of the above. So, we're thinking about protecting it. We've now shaped our mindset. So what is the basic plan then for, or the philosophy for defending against the mass casualty attack? Here are the core tenets. Practicing security in depth is the way I see it. There are 6 levels to that, and we're going to talk about it. Reacting with immediate lethal neutralizing force. We don't want to kill people, but if we have to kill people to save life, we must kill someone to save life. For everything, there's a time and a season. And the scripture in Ecclesiastes does tell us a time for war, a time for peace, a time to kill, a time to let live. We must have strategic positioning of our security footprint and our security team members. And they must have professional, skilled reactions to any threat. So, security in depth, that's what I call level 1. Observation and salutation is level 1. Here are the crucial key factors. Vigilance and salutation at the parking lot. Vigilance and salutation in the lobby and in the foyer and the greeting areas. Vigilance and salutation at the sanctuary entrance doors. In other words, we should see something coming if someone is pulling out a rifle in the parking lot. If we missed it in the parking lot, we should see it before they get to the lobby or in the foyer. We should see it before they get into the sanctuary doors. And the way we get that is observation and salutation. Level 2, proactive protection. Here are the key factors. Secure spaces before, during, and after services or event occurrences. In other words, we are to be attentive to the doors, to the exits, the halls, and the paths. People should not be able to get in before it's time. They should not be able to hide themselves and clandestine themselves in other places. In the mall up in Indiana, the gentleman who did the shooting hid himself away in the bathroom. We have to be attentive to these doors in these places. We have to be attentive to backpacks and large bags. All right, so we have to find ways of checking those politely, with love, but we must check. Because I can tell you, being a person who trains with guns, I can get a very powerful gun in a small footprint and get it in the midst of you. And so, and it just be in a little satchel or something that's maybe not quite a little satchel, but not quite a big satchel. We need to make sure that we are proactive about examining these items. We need to secure the indoor and outdoor premises during any fire alarms. I've seen this a lot. I've probed churches. I've had pastors come and have me look at their churches and look at their best practices. And one of the things that I've seen doing fire alarms, because we've all been trained when we were in school that during the fire alarm, we immediately line up and we head out. in the church environment, it is possible for somebody to pull the fire alarm just to get people to come out. And then all of a sudden now, that we're walking ducks. We're like quail walking across the field. We must have plans and a commitment that if that fire alarm goes off, that our security footprint immediately hits outside to make sure that that outside premise is secure before we rush the people outside. Back in the late 90s or early 2000s, some kids shot up the Jonesboro High School. Either high school or elementary school. And what they did is these two elementary school students went and pulled a fire alarm, ran outside, hid on the hill, and took their father's guns and started shooting people when they come out. Leaving during a fire alarm at a place where we aggregate people is a very dangerous circumstance. And so we must be proactive about protecting both the indoor and the outdoor premises during fire alarms. That also applies that we must secure the outdoor transitional spaces at benediction. When we open the doors of the church and people flow out, that's a potentially vulnerable place. We need to have a strong security footprint there to make sure that we keep the people secure. Level 3, interception. This interception must be immediate but calm physical diversion and interdiction of people who just come to disrupt or potentially or people who maybe would be threat actors. And here's what I mean by that. So I know at the Boulevard, that was the Brotherhood Safety and Security Ministry. The way I always saw that is if somebody were disruptive or what have you, if we needed to politely but firmly escort them out, we intercept some things. We intercept somebody's coming. Where's the pastor? I want to talk to him, right? No, we can intercept that person. This team must be combatively trained in some ways, right? Because the gun is not their solution. The ability to de-escalate is their solution. And the ability to properly and professionally place hands on people to get control of them so that we can move them to secure places or other places so they're not disruptive. That interception gives us the ability potentially to ward off some things. Somebody's walking quickly down the aisle at a time when they shouldn't be, and they're approaching the pulpit or platform area. There must be people who are triangulated in a position where they can just move over there and intercept that person so that they don't get there. I'm pretty sure all of us at some point have possibly seen some circumstances where somebody has gotten too close to a pastor during a service. I've seen it before. Interception failed. So we must be committed to that. That is a level 3 depth of security, and it must be there at all time, because remember, a threat actor only has to succeed one time. If they succeed one time, we fail. All right. Now, obviously, level 4 is what I call mitigation. I've been talking about mitigation a lot. Here are the crucial key factors. Neutralization of the active shooter or other mass casualty threat actors with lethal response by what I consider a special clandestine threat mitigation team. In other words, I call these active threat mitigators. They are specially trained to a tier 1 to a special forces standard, not to a basic police standard. They must be trained to deal with the significant threat. And here's why they must be specially trained. The church is a dense population. There may be chaos. We have to possibly shoot on the move, things like that. So they must be trained. That's why, again, someone who has a special, just a regular handgun permit, that's not the person. We have to send people to training in the same way that we send our pastors and our spiritual leaders to theological school, so that they will be able to rightly divide the word of truth, right? Level 5, reaction. Here's the crucial factors. There must be an organized and methodical congregational threat response training. In other words, specifically, we must train the congregation as to what they should do in the midst of a lethal threat, or what they should do during any type of altercation or disruption. And we must have an organized training for that. All right, so that's for existing members. We must have a way of training new members as we onboard people, as we assimilate people into our congregation, as we intake them. We have to find a way of conveying this, our safety ministry or information to them. We must have training for people who work in the children's church, and also for the children and in the youth in the same way that they get training at school. We must have a commitment to this type of teaching people how to react, because in reality, if the threat mitigation team is having to go to work, we need the congregation to work to respond a certain way so that they can be efficient without hurting any of the congregants. The auxiliary ministries need some training. And we must have periodic recurring and refresher training of the entire congregation, all the ministries that's associated with our churches. That's what I call reaction. How do we react to the lethal threat or a disruptive event in church? And then level 6 is the final level. We must know how to react. I call this is medication and incident treatment, the crucial factors. Advanced trauma and wound treatment and training. As opposed, so many churches have a typical church health organization that deals with first aid, illness, somebody fainting or passing out, or possible, heart problems or diabetic, sugar problems, what have you. But when it comes to dealing with how we protect the church and the congregation from the lethal threat, we need people to have stop the bleed capabilities, how to put tourniquets on, how to pack a wound, how to seal up something right quick. Why? Because these moments are mattering, and it's going to take a moment for first responders, which are really second responders, specifically EMTs and paramedics, to show up. And so if we're serious about protecting the congregants on our campus, in the event that something happens, we need equipment in place. So we need tourniquets and things in place. And we need, just like we need a church security ministry training, we need a medication or trauma incident team in place, strategically placed, and the equipment to be able to stop the bleed. All right. Because if someone has been shot, they may still have a chance if we stop the bleed. So now, if we're talking about reacting with immediate lethal force, we have to understand the force continuum for our active threat mitigators. This is what it comes down to, because I'm not championing just having guns in church. I'm championing the concept that we must stop lethal threat actors. And so here's the force continuum. If the lethal weapon is produced in the midst of our occupied worship spaces, or if the lethal threat is hot and active, someone has started shooting their way in, or started shooting on the parking lot, which is how it typically starts, then, or they have indicated strongly the intention to use lethal force, or they haven't expressed, or they are threatening that, and it is expressed by an aggressor, and the criminal use of deadly force is real and existent, then the threat actor must be stopped immediately using force, up to and including lethal force. Well, it's a difficult conversation. We don't want to hurt anybody. We are trained to be peaceful. But if these 4 conditions are met, we must react with immediate lethal force. If we have to grasp in our mind that that's what we will do. So we then ask ourselves, who shall protect this house? Who has the responsibility? Who will engage in the work of church protection? Who are our modern day porters? How will it be done? How must they be trained? Designated teams. That's the best practice. All right. So there must be a close protection or dignitary protection team. This protection team, one of them typically exists. That's the armor bearers. They are protecting the pastors, the VIPs, the first ladies, the special guests that come in, the first family, right? All the clergy on the platform. That's who are protecting them. But we must also have a separate, visible, identifiable safety ministry. What I call that the unarmed brotherhood or sisterhood for, as we discussed before, for interception and behavioral deterrence. Some of them may be armed, but we don't want the gun to be their primary solution. We want de-escalation, a spirit of brotherly and sisterly love, and hand skills to be able to solve some issues. Because everything does not require us to go to the gun. Every situation is not a nail, and the gun is not the hammer. All right. But when we do need the hammer, we need an armed, well-trained, but clandestine, immediate reaction threat mitigation team. These people should be plainclothes members of other various ministries. In other words, some of them may be ushers, some of them may be greeters, some may be in the choir, some may be in the musicians, some may be in the media department. All of these, in other words, and they are strategically placed, but no one who comes in to threaten our place should be able to identify who they are so that we can react. That's the best practice. And as we discussed a moment ago, we need a reactionary trauma care team. That could be a subset of the church health organization. We really need those 4 teams. Some people may do double duty, but those are the 4 areas that we really need to be able to carry. And for the purpose of accountability and the best way to, and implementing and keeping things solid and clear, it is best that we recognize them as 4 separate teams. So threat mitigators, what do they need? They must have a watchman spirit. They standing on the wall. They are the people that the scripture says, stand on the wall and blow the trumpet, right? So that the people are warned. For if they do not blow the trumpet, then any blood is going to be on them. So we need these people to have a watchman spirit. Their primary focus is the protection of the congregants and visitors within the sanctuary spaces, the halls, the classrooms, while ingression and egressing into and out of the worship facility and on parking lots. These are active, plainclothes, lethal threat responders made up of faithful personnel who are from several key, well-positioned ministries. I mentioned that: ushers, greeters, safety ministry, music, media, deacons, diaconate, elders, pastoral team, and other trusted church staff. Positioning of these mitigators should be at all entrances, both inside and out, triangulated, so on angles on the parking lots, strategically placed within the sanctuary and at different elevations, and outside and within the children's or nursery and children's church areas. We must never leave that place or those areas unsecured. And we have to be able to respond in a triangulated fashion. And here's why. Because an active shooter can only shoot in one direction. And the way you stop them is not to trade gunfire. You shoot him from the side, from the back, or from elevation when his focus is in some other direction, right? So if I were sitting at the edge of the aisle and I popped up in the middle of the aisle to get him as he's coming down, he's going to get me. But if someone else were off to the side while he was going down the aisle, we can punch him, we can get him, all right? So strategic positioning is key. These are the skills that are required for this particular area. They must have strong tactical marksmanship and dynamic moving skills with both the pistol and, depending on the size of your congregation, possibly a short carbine of some sort. Because depending on the level of firepower that someone brings, you might need to be able to get back with them. It's something pretty significant. All right. They need to have skills at being able to disarm people, of their weapons, whether their weapons is whether that person's weapon is a firearm or a knife or a bludgeoning object, a baton or something. They must have disarmament skills. They must also have empty hand skills, right? So because everything is not about the gun, right? So the gun is not always the solution. Right. So sometimes I need to be able to put my hands on somebody, put them in a compliance position. Obviously, I need to be able to de-escalate. And as always, we must have a customer service, a hospitality mindset, a spirit of love, no matter what? Even though our work is serious, we must still have a spirit of love. All right. So every church then, according to that, needs 15 key protection plans. And these plans are direct this way. And you can contact me later and I can send you some detailed discussions on these plans. But here are the plans. You need a plan in relation to a personal attack on the pastor, the first family, and other clergy persons during services. We need to know exactly what we will do if something happens. We need to know exactly what we do in relation to an active shooter or a mass killer showing up on the property. We need to know exactly what we'll do when in relation to the fire alarm. We need to know exactly what we will do in relation to the parking lot, in relation to the nursery and children's church, in relation to benediction, what our best practices will be, in relation to pre-services, facility checks, and post-service security footprints. How do we clear this building? In relation to what happens on the screen with our audiovisual media and screen warnings and responses. In relation to persons of interest or suspicious persons profiling. You know, and I'm gonna put a pin in that for a second. If I train, I do some hand-to-hand combatives too, and I often train ladies who are in domestic situations and who have been battered. And so they come to me because obviously, they may have a restraining order for somebody or what have you. The church needs to have a specific plan about how it communicates to its membership to make the membership comfortable enough and committed enough to share certain sensitive information with our security footprint so that we can be aware if a person of interest shows up on the campus or what have you. And the estranged spouse, the person who's coming to snatch a kid or what have you, or the disgruntled person. So we have to have a plan so that we can identify persons of interest or profile suspicious persons, right? Because, profiling, sometimes we do profile. I profile people every day, right? So we have to profile, but we need to do it professionally and intelligently. So with that, then we need plans in relation to known domestic issues. Because again, the estranged spouses come on the property. We need training or plans in relation to ongoing training and skills and talent development. How are we training and cross-training people in our ministries to facilitate reinforcing our security and protection footprint? We need specific plans about how we will use our video surveillance, our closed circuit feeds, and how we use the monitored videos and things. We need plans in relation to communications before something, after something happens, during something, how we will deal with the media, who's going to talk to the media, we need a plan for that. Nothing should be we shouldn't, especially for liability point of view, when something happens, any and everybody don't need to be talking to the police and to the media, and we need to have a plan for that. We need to know who's designated. And we need to have a plan in relation to awareness, weapons awareness, and armed team safety. If our security ministries come or members of our security ministries come on the campus, we need to know who's armed today. We need to have a plan for where they will be positioned, etc. All right. So we need to know who's armed, what arms you brought in. We need to know when you last certified, etc. We need to know these things. So we need a plan that outlines all of that. And we need a plan in relation to team personnel. What happens when we have some conflicts with personnel? If we need to remove somebody from the team, if we need to counsel somebody, sit someone down, or maybe retask them, to point them in another ministry direction, we need a plan for that. All right. So those are key protection plans. They will help you establish your protection footprint. Now, so if you're talking about training people, here are our basic training assumptions. Your team must be trained for the following conditions: a densely populated worship and social space. So therefore, marksmanship excellence cannot be compromised in such an environment. When I train people to be church mitigators, threat mitigators, we train them to make what I call the cross sanctuary shot. Yeah, it's a play on my name, but it still is the cross sanctuary shot because we may have to take a shot across the sanctuary. The minimum distance for that on that training is 25 yards on the moving target. And the moving target is about the size of a telephone book. So you literally have to train your people to be magnificent if they're going to carry a firearm in the midst of the people. And that's why I say they must have the special forces level training. Permit class is not it. They have to undergo real training because the worship space is densely populated. They also have to train because under stress, there is an overwhelming body response. So I train mitigators to perform past the effects of the adrenaline dump, the increased cardiovascular and respiratory intensity, and the subsequent tunnel vision that comes as a result of both. I can tell you with training with military and special forces, they use a technique called combat breathing. And when they have to deploy the weapon, they immediately start combat breathing, which is flooding their brain with high levels of oxygen to counter things. So you have to train according to that. We also have to assume that attackers may be dynamic, in motion, and very well armed. So we train mitigators to have aggressive long-range capability with the pistol in the open air environment of a sanctuary or a parking lot, as well as close quarters battle space, such as a short corridor, classroom, or a suite of classrooms or offices, or like if we're moving down the hall to get to the children's church or what have you. So the threat mitigators must have a variety of high quality skills, all right? Going back to the gentleman who took out the shooter in the mall up in Indiana, he took that shot at 40 yards. He took 10 shots, 80% of them hit his target. That is an excellent outcome, especially at 40 yards, right? So he had a magnificent skill. So they must be trained well. Here's the other assumption. An attacker may not be alone, right? So we train mitigators for the lone wolf attacker, for multiple attackers, and for frontal assaults and ambush attacks, and to a counterattack using countering angular assault moves, ambushes, and offline of attack techniques, all right? So the attackers may not be alone. They may be highly skilled. And so understanding that we must train our threat mitigators to be able to deal with that under the understanding that they may be dealing with multiple attackers, et cetera. Also, the attackers may be wearing body armor. So mitigators must be trained on how to shoot to defeat and negate body armor, bullet-resistant vest, and ballistic plates. And so they have to know where on the body to get the shots, in order to stop them. That unfortunately, up at the grocery store in Brooklyn, the security guard, who was a former police officer, who was shooting at the gentleman, or I won't call him a gentleman, the miscreant who attacked the grocery store. That man had on body armor. The police officer did not have the training to know that he needed to go to the groin because the groin is not protected, and then to the head. He needed to be able to zip him up. He went with his standard training, which is center of mass, but there was body armor there, all right? And so threat mitigators need to know the best practice, the modern best practices, and have it fully present in their mind how to deal with somebody with body armor. They also need to assume that attacks may occur from different planes and from balconies. Some churches, it's not just a single floor, we have balconies. So you have to train your mitigator to be able to accurately neutralize the threat from elevation or shooting up to elevation. Because when you're shooting down, there's some trajectory issues that you have to be aware of. And so you need to train past that. So those are basic training assumptions. Here's the final fundamental assumption. An attacker will have the element of surprise. So we must train mitigators to overcome the attacker's initial surprise. Because that initial size gives them a surprise-based tactical advantage. We have to disrupt what's called the OODA loop. The OODA loop stands for orientation or observation, orientation, decision, and action. So an attacker has come, that attacker already has a prior observation and orientation and has made some decisions. We need to disrupt that. And the way we do that is we train the mitigators to get right at it. So in other words, we're not defending, because to defend is to lose. A mitigator must immediately go on the offense. It's like fighting. If I'm fighting, if I'm blocking, I'm actually losing. I should be striking your arms as you're trying to hit me. I should be striking and turning to get to you. That's what allows me to win. Because if I'm blocking, I'm not getting any injury on you, I am losing. Likewise, if somebody is in our midst and they've come to attack us, and I'm trying to run to find a better place of cover, I'm losing, he's winning. We have to address it. Unfortunately, if you saw the video of the police in the school in Uvalde, they were defending, they were running from the attacker instead of pressing the attack. We must train our mitigators to be able to press the attack, to overcome and disrupt that OODA loop of the attack. So when we train, or when you decide to train your team, this is the required training methodology. There must always start with a baseline evaluation of shooting and marksman skills, specific instruction, teaching and building fundamental skills, training, which is on the range fundamental components of skills development. In other words, we're over and over. I show you what to do, I correct you. And then drilling on the range combinations of tactical skills and components. In other words, we're stringing things together. So it's not enough for me to be able to draw and shoot, but now I need to be able to draw, shoot, and shoot on the move after turning. That's drilling. Evaluation, stress-induced performance of skills under the pressures of time, motion, movement, obstacles, malfunctions, and noise. Those are the requirements, and that is the standard. And here's the thing, anybody that you will allow to be on your church safety and security and protection ministry, you cannot take their training for granted. Unless they are literally coming to you and showing you the credentials where they were the SWAT officer, or they came from a special mission unit in the military, a Navy SEAL, Delta Force operator, or something like that. You cannot presume that they are skilled, and you cannot take any training for granted. They must have baseline evaluation, instruction, training, drilling, and further evaluation. You cannot take any of that for granted. So as we wrap up, I want you to reflect again on the concept of the carnage to time ratio and ascertain for yourself, what is your carnage to time ratio? If you got a pen in front of you, write it down on a piece of paper. How much carnage is acceptable in your space, in your church, and where you work or what have you, before the police arrive? To the families, the congregants, the parishioners, the guests and visitors, that number, their carnage to time ratio is 0. I don't want to be killed if the active shooter comes on the campus. And if you're not doing what you need to do to protect me, that is problematic for me, right? That's unacceptable. People want to go to churches, and to places where they feel safe and secure. So keep this in mind. When the threat is active, one life lost is one life too many. That concludes my presentation. I appreciate you all giving me this opportunity to work with you. I hope that the presentation shaped your mind, gave you some things to think about, and help you to further protect your church. It has been my honor to speak with you and present with you all today.
Thank you so very much, Jonathan. That was powerful. I go back to the devotion, and I said that the title of it was to open our eyes, and that's what this presentation did for me. And I'm certain that I speak for everyone who is present on this morning. This indeed opened our eyes. Just a little tidbit, my thinking was that, okay, well, if you got security, we're good. No. No, there's certainly a holistic approach. And one thing that stuck with me, Jonathan, is that when you said that securing the church is a ministry.
It is a ministry.
It is indeed a ministry. Be a place in the chat for anyone if they have any questions. If they're like me, they're probably just very moved by the information that has been shared. And I indicated, I think we have about 66 disciple churches, of Christ churches in our state of Tennessee. And this presentation needs to go to all of them. In fact, it needs to go to every worship space, even outside of our denomination, because this is just helpful information that will help us to protect our place of worship. Vita, do you have any closing remarks?
No, just that my mind is like this going, oh my gosh.
I know.
So much information. Do want to let everyone know we have recorded the session, and we will be talking with Jonathan to see if we can get a condensed version of maybe his PowerPoint so that we can post it online as well. So if anyone has any questions, I know people were putting things in the chat. Jonathan, I did put your website in the chat. So if you'll check that and make sure that that's the best way to get in contact with you. If there's a phone number that you want to put where people, because we have had the question of how can we get in touch with him? Because this is something, as Clyde said, everybody needs to have. So this is just a snippet of it. Jonathan is on his way this afternoon to another church training. So we don't want to keep him from that. And if anyone has any questions, if you want to put them in the chat, we can make sure they get to Jonathan and that he answers them. Or we have a few minutes left if you want to come off mute and ask your question, or if you want to just put them in the chat. So let us know.
And I do have some time before I have to get to the other location. So I'm fine.
Right. Great. All right. Let me put your...
Vita.
Yes.
I do have a question. This is Laverne Bobo, and I am from Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church. May I?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. I just want to ask one question. First of all, hi, Jonathan. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Laverne. How are you? It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. You still are on my list as well to make sure that I attend one of your classes for a permit. So my question is, Jonathan, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's very well needed in such a time as this. My question to you is, how do you approach the church leadership? What is your suggestion in terms of how do you bring this conversation up without being offensive, without being overreactive, but yet conscious of the safety that is required or is much needed for the church?
So I like approaching things with the Socratic method myself, so I like to ask open-ended questions. I'm gonna change my lighting a bit. Well, now that's worse. I like to ask open-ended questions, which is, hey, Pastor, we've seen some things, or whomever the designated leadership is. you know, because obviously we have to have, everything's based on some personal relationships in many regards, right? And we do want to recognize the proper hierarchy and chains of responsibility and things, you know. So we may, you know, just in a simple interaction with church leadership as, hey, what steps are we taking to ensure that we are safe in this environment, right? So ask an open-ended question, one that does not, you know, so we don't want to say, Pastor, I don't feel safe, right? Because that's accusatory. You know, that's the equivalent of telling somebody you never did this, or you don't do this, or you leave them out hanging, right? So we just ask an open-ended question of leadership with whom you have relationship. Because, you know, let's say, for instance, Elder Clyde Hunt and I have some relationship. So because we have relationship, and I may or may not have direct connection at any given time with the pastor, but because we have relationship and I know he has the ear, I may speak with Elder Hunt and say, hey, Elder Hunt, this is something I've been thinking about, a concern of mine. What is the church doing? Or are you familiar with, you know, what steps have been taken or taken or what have you? And then Elder Hunt may escalate a question on up for you, or say, hey, well, look, let me set up a conversation or a meeting with you and the pastor or the director of operations of whomever, and let's discuss it, right? That's how I would go about doing it.
Thank you, Jonathan. And once again, I have really enjoyed your presentation. Very informative. And like I said, for such a time as this that we are in. Thank you. Back to you, Vita.
Thank you.
Clyde, we have one question in the chat. Do you think we have time to go ahead and ask that one?
Yeah, I see that, Vita. Thank you. I can read it. It says, we're in a low socioeconomic area and see a lot of poor homeless people within our context. Where we do profile is at times hard to gauge who may be a threat and who may be coming in for prayer. How do you gauge without impending but still be aware? And that's an excellent question. It comes from Adrian Overton. So Jonathan, you also will see that question in the chat. So I'll let you address it at the time.
All right, so that's an excellent question. And here's how I would address it. If we always have a protection footprint or mindset, then we don't necessarily have to profile individuals differently than any other individual, right? So in other words, our protection footprint should be such that it does not discriminate at all. We treat everyone with love when they come in, but at the same time, we wash the hands of everyone. People that we are not familiar with, everyone that we're not familiar with, we check strange bags of everyone that we're not familiar with. So we're not discriminating, right? If it's hot outside and someone comes in with a big coat, anyone who comes in with a large coat, we're going to ask you, sir, ma'am, can you open your coat and turn around? Can we step over here and let us look at something? Welcome to church today. We're glad to have you, right? So again, remember that first level was the salutation and observation, right? And we're salutation and observation. That goes a long way, right? Welcome to church, brother. I can shake your hand. Well, we're in COVID now, so we tend not to do any shaking of hands, but we do come close to somewhat, right? And people will tell you by their body language. They will give you some things that help you with profiling. So for example, in the military, the way they profile, they have there's a concept called left of bang. And in left of bang, you are looking for threat indicators. For example, if somebody's coming in and they're fidgeting and they're looking over, they keep patting some spot on their body, and it makes no sense for, so for instance, if I had my firearm on, it would be right here. If I'm up to something and I I'm padding right here. It makes no sense for me to be constantly padding right there. You can presume, hey, I may have a weapon right there, right? If I got a knife in my pocket, I may find myself rubbing my pocket like that. Or if I got something up under my coat, I'm going to do it. So those are indicators that you can apply to everyone. People's behavior will tell the truth on them. One of the ways I can tell you, the police officers, the way they could always arrest drug dealers on the street, even if they didn't know that an individual was particularly selling a drug, when the police pulled up to the corner, the person started touching their pocket, you know that's what a stash is. Or the person keeps looking over at this rock over there to the side, the police know, oh, he got something hidden under that rock. You see? Behavior tells us something. I introduced you to the left of bang concept. There's a book called Left of Bang. It's an excellent read. I recommend that everyone, if you have an opportunity, go to Amazon and order that book. You can get it on in Audible, or you can get it in paperback or as Kindle. It's an excellent book on profiling, not in profiling in a way that is not based on race. It's not based on class. It is based on behavior. Left of Bang, I'll get it just a second. I got one right here. So this is it. It is Left of Bang by Patrick Van Horn. It's an excellent book. I recommend anybody who's even interested in their own personal security, you will learn a lot about how to look at your environment, and it'll help you sidestep some things. I hope that answers your question. So yeah, Left of Bang by Patrick Van Horn, actually, and Jason Riley.
Thank you, Jonathan. I know our time is near, and as you was talking, I was thinking about greeters and how greeters need to be trained. You know, greeters are doing the hello, how you doing, but they should also be trained to look for specific behaviors or things that congregants may be carrying, so that they can alert others in that. So I understand now the concept. It's everybody. You know,
everybody.
It's a joint effort. Adrian says, thank you. Mental health is also heavy in the area as the government shuts down one of our area mental hospitals and release them into the streets. So we see a lot of sweatshirts, layers of clothing, etc. So she says your answer helped out a lot. Thank you so much. Dr. Davis is excellent, got it. And then Vita, of course, noted the Left of Bang by Patrick Van Horn and Jason Riley. Disciples, thank you all so very much, and a huge thank you, Jonathan, for this amazing presentation. May God just restore 100-fold the time that you spent in preparing for us on today. Vita, if there's nothing else, then I'm going to say we're closing this out. And contact Vita Bankhead. She will certainly provide you information if you would like more information regarding Jonathan's presentation.
Yes, thank you so much, Jonathan. We really appreciate it. Clyde, thank you so much. Don't forget to check the website. We will update you when we have Jonathan's presentation available for you. But in the meantime, keep checking our website, and our next workshop, virtual workshop, is going to be September 9th and 10th. Going to have a 2-part workshop then. So check the website for more information. And thank you again, everyone. Have a safe weekend, and more information is coming. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you. God bless everybody. Be safe.
All right.
Goodbye, everybody. Great workshop. Bye, Jonathan. See you later.
Take care.
Great job, Vita and Elder Hunt.
Thank you, Laverne. Let me know when you sign up for that class with Jonathan. I need to take it too.
We'll go together.
Yes.
I have a 38, so I go to the range as we speak, but I do not have a permit, so I have to be careful where I transport my gun.
Yes.
But don't transport it nowhere until you get a permit.
But I have to take it to the range.
Well, you can transport it in your car to the range.
Yeah, it's called the Castle Law. Am I correct, Jonathan?
Yes. Well, you know, if you're in Tennessee, now Tennessee is a permitless carry state, so you can actually carry your firearm without a permit. Mm-hmm. However, there are some prohibited places. So for instance, if you don't have a permit, you cannot carry the firearm into a park. Right. You must have a, you know, so if you go walking in the park and you don't have a permit, you can't carry. But you can have the firearm in your car. Don't leave the gun in your car where somebody can steal it, you know, if they break in. But it is always good to have a permit, especially if you travel and you travel with your firearm.
Well, I'm going to be looking for you to help me with that. And Vita is going to come with me.
Well, that's what I do.
As a matter of fact, I think 3 more girls are going to come with me. We'll be called the Shooter Girls.
Oh, okay then.
Hey, I like it.
I like that. Get us some t-shirts.
I like it.
It's tactical, yes.
Like that, Elder Clyde.
Well, I'm just thinking that when I'm at the worship space of Mrs. Boulevard, I need to sit next to you. I have a permanent seat now next to Laverne. You know.
Bye, everybody. Take care. Great job.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we still got a couple of more people on.
I think we can probably, I'm not sure how to close out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I need to stop.